going on, guys? It's me, Parksy, here, and today we're going to be looking through Mew from Generation 1 to Generation 7, seeing how viable it was and how great of a Pokemon it was. As you guys know, Mew was probably the first Pokemon to have base 100 stats on the board. I think it actually was the first, and it has got wide coverage, so hopefully it will be doing as well as I hope it will be in every single generation. If you guys do enjoy it at any moment, leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. This video is actually taken as an idea from False Swipe Gaming and his Pokemon that he likes to do from Generation 1 to Generation 7. So, just a big shout out to him. So, yeah, let's get into the video. You may not expect it, but this Pokemon in Generation 1, which is a huge threat, even though it looks like, I don't even know what it looks like. I know it's supposed to be some sort of monster that was created by machines, but he looks absolutely weird as a Generation 1 sprite. But for Generation 1, you had the widest move pool. It was debatable, but I definitely think it did. Being able to set up a sword stance, be a physical sweeper, or hit on the special side and do massive damage. Because of this reason, it actually was an Uber's, and if you guys do not know, Psychic type was broken in Generation 1. There was only one weakness to it, and that was Bug, and there was only 3 Bug type moves in the entirety of the game. So in Generation 1, if you had a Psychic type, it would have been broken. Every single team essentially had a Psychic type Pokemon if they were a very competitive player. You also have to consider that Ubers did not consist of many Pokemon around this generation because of the lack of legendaries, so Ed and Mewtwo just run rampant in this Ubers generation. But Mew basically did what you might expect. It spammed its coverage moves. If it was a physical variant, it would have used Explosion or Swift, and even used Earthquake. If it was a special variant, it would have used Blizzard, Thunderbolt, and Psychic was a general move that it would have used for its special set. It could also use Stop World, which gave reliable recovery, which made it a very hard threat to take down, especially since Bug type moves would be very unviable and unreliable in Generation 1. Were the only way to super effectively take it down. To defeat this Pokemon, you essentially had to freeze it or paralyze it and hope that you managed to knock it down, because the only other response to it would have been with bug type attacks. I could also use things like Body Slam if it wanted to get a bit lucky and go for the Para Hacks, and I could also use Fire Blast if it wanted to hit with another strong move. Fire Blast also was another hacksy move if you wanted a 10% burn to burn these physical type attackers, and that would have also helped out a lot. It also had base 100 stats across the board, so you can invest all your EVs into every single stat. This thing would have taken a lot of hits and outsped quite a few threats. Also, with this Pokemon's base 100 speed stat, it meant that it actually got crits quite a few times. Because if these guys do not know, crits were determined on the speed stat of a Pokemon back in Generation 1, so things like Persian and Tauros were very viable because most of their hits were critted. There are no real counters to Mew, but however, Mewtwo is better than Mew in almost every single way. Mewtwo is just a lot more of a stronger threat, being able to have higher stats than Mew itself. Mew did have one thing that was better than Mewtwo, and that was Sword Stance Explosion, which could have knocked out Mewtwo at +2, but I did have to fear the unlikelihood, but still chance that Mewtwo was running barrier to take on opposing Mew. Mew, sorry, just because of its wide coverage, didn't have any counters. You could not send in any Pokemon and be confident it would take down this Mew, just because it could literally be running anything, so that is why Mew made it to Ubers, but generally Mewtwo was used a lot more than Mew just because it hit harder. Generation 2 came around and it was basically no different. Mew was still in Ubers and very high up the ladder indeed. It was one of the most promising sets with the ability to be a sword stance sweeper like last time. It also could run extra coverage moves such as Rock Slide and Submission this time to handle the ever-growing dark types which were now present in Generation 2. Items were also a new thing that were added to Generation 2, so Mew could use leftovers to its full extent to gain even more reliable recovery and make Mew even more of a nuisance. But if the general sword stancing set like Shadow Ball, Rock Slide, and Submission did not suit you with leftovers, you could basically run any special type move you wanted, or any attack generally, because Mew got every TM in the game. I could also use things like Thunder Wave if I wanted to be a bit more of a supportive set. Like in last generation, I could have also used Explosion, and I can also set up, instead of Sword Stance, it could be a little bit more of a bulky sweeper with Curse, or else it could just go for counter to counter those physical type attackers. You didn't have many Swampins, or any Pokemon that could take it down successfully in Generation 2. But there were two Pokemon that could have stood a chance if Mew was not carrying the regular set. The first one was Heracross, because most Mews do not carry Psychic in Generation 2, so Heracross could have came in quite free as long as Mew wasn't carrying Fire Blast or Psychic, and could have got off a lot of damage with a super effective Bug Stab. The next Pokemon was Muk, but of course Muk had to worry about Earthquake or Psychic. However, as I said previously, the most common set was the Swords Dance set with Shadow Ball, Submission, and Rock Slide. You could have also thrown in Explosion if you wanted to, but that was generally the set. So things like Muk and Heracross most of the time would have been a safe answer. You couldn't really be too sure with Mew and its white coverage. Tyranitar, if Mew wasn't carrying any fighting coverage or anything to hit Tyranitar very hard, could have pursued trapped it as well. But Tyranitar was a massive threat in Generation 2 as well, and most of the time Mew was carrying fighting coverage, so could have taken down Tyranitar pretty easily. And now Generation 3 came, and Mew unlocked its new ability, Synchronize, which would carry for the rest of the generations. With base 100 stats across the board, and the unpredictability of its wide move pool and insane stats, really no Pokemon could really stand a chance versus this Pokemon, and yet again, like the past two generations, it was an Uber's. The most common set was a Speedy Mew with Calm Mind, Soft Boil, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam for the Volt Beam coverage, which is ever reliant in the next few generations. You probably have heard the term before of Volt Beam. But yet again, like Generation 1, as I explained, Mew runs into the same problem that is outclassed by Mewtwo in almost every single way, apart from Mewtwo has a little bit less of a wide move pool than Mew. So unless you're going to be using those random moves that Mew gets in comparison to Mewtwo, you're better to use Mewtwo just because it has a stronger hitting power than Mew. However, a physical Mew can counter Skarmory, and especially offensive Mew can easily counter Blissey. It also carried taunts, so anything that tried to disrupt it with Thunder Waves or Toxics would also get a taunt. And thanks to Synchronize ability, even if it was Toxic, then the opponent would have to take a Toxic as well, unless it was the Poison or Steel typing. If your team wanted more of a defensive Mew, it can run Toxic support. However, that set was often, most of the time, countered by Blissey, so you would have to run Snatch. And like most Pokemon in this generation, it had a Sub-Punch set with Substitute and Focus Punch. It counters things like Blissey in case it were a problem. Sub-Punch would have probably been able to knock out Blissey with one Focus Punch coming off this Pokemon's base 100 attack stat. Mew even took advantage of Choice Band in this generation, and Mewtwo managed to use it to boost his physical type attacks by a lot. It also could run Hypnosis and a Transform set. Anything that this Pokemon got was generally used as a reliable set in this generation. Transform set allowed it so any setup sweepers that tried to come in on Mew would then have their stats taken by this Pokemon and their own Pokemon taken. There weren't, as most generations, a reliable counter to Mew, but anything that could outspeed Mew and get off a powerful hit generally was a good response to Mew. This generation, it carried less of fighting coverage and more taunt, so things like Tyranitar could easily pursue trap it or hit it with a powerful crunch. However, if Mew was carrying a fighting type move, Tyranitar would be obliterated because it would be outsped. Generation 4 came around and surprise surprise, Mew remained in Ubers. Honestly, I'm wondering where it falls down to OU now, because I know it was OU from Generation 6, but I guess we'll have to find out. Yet again, in this generation, Mew was outclassed by Mewtwo, but except on more of a scale this time, Mew being barely used in Ubers because Mewtwo was such a jam threat. However, Mew did have some viable sets in Ubers. Being able to utilize Baton Pass finally in this generation, Mew had a very different role in this generation, being able to use Rock Polish and Nasty Plot and then pass it on to the next Pokemon using Baton Pass. It also could use Taunt to prevent phasers from whirlwinding it out or roaring it out, and generally it was a very strong Pokemon in this chain, which was very reliable and a very strong Pokemon in this core to try and pass as many stat boosts as possible to the next Pokemon and not to disrupt the chain. Pokemon yet again had to think twice about toxicing this Pokemon in case they got toxic themselves. However, most Mews this generation, if they were a fully Baton passing Mew, would have carried Lung Berry to prevent things like burn and poison racking up on them. But this time, in comparison to Generation 1, the Psychic typing wasn't really that good in this time. because Mew couldn't really sponge many hits when it came in. It wasn't a dedicated switch into many mons because it was only psychic typing, therefore it could only resist psychic and fighting typing Pokemon. Mew also got Stealth Rocks this generation, of course it did. And this time it could have been used as a lead Pokemon with U-Turn and Stealth Rocks. Also, if that didn't work out for you, U-Turning and setting up Stealth Rocks, you could have resorted to the last generation, or Generation 2, or even Generation 1, and just explode on things. Also, like I mentioned previously in the last generation, Mew would have been a transforming variant, and this time it managed to get Choice Scarf, so its transforming was a lot better. This time if it copied something with the Dragon Dance boost, it would have outsped said Pokemon because it had a Choice Scarf. It could also run screens with this set, or else it could have ran Trick trying to trick a Choice Scarf onto things like Blissey or Skarmory. Like I said, in most generations, Mew didn't have any full counters. With this generation, it actually got a reliable, half reliable, let's just say, counter to it in the name of Metagross. Metagross managed to take a +2 Earthquake from Mew, and also a Tyranitar, Mew's old friend. If EV'd correctly, could take a +2 Aura Sphere from this Pokemon. Mewtwo also, yet again, is a very problematic Pokemon for Mew, especially this time with the most common Mew set, which was the Baton Passing, Rock Polishing, Sword Dancing / Nasty Plotting set. It would have struggled because Mewtwo can fire off a fast taunt and disrupt the chain that Mew was about to create. As well as that, Latios could also scare at Mew by threatening to Oko with Draco Meteor, and Weavile, although not very common in Ubers, could have fired off a very strong pursuit. The main reason why Weavile was in Ubers, to be perfectly honest, was to counter Mew. Or another counter could have been Deoxys Attack, however, it would not have been a switching because Deoxys Attack, defense stats is piss poor, so that means you'll have to ascend it as a revenge killer if anything. Generation 5 now came around, and boy it hit Mew hard, knocking it down all the way from Ubers to UU. This Pokemon that was once a very scary threat in Ubers was now simply demoted to UU. Why was this? Well, I said previously that its base 100 stats were very good in Generation 2, but that was when you could max out stats, and that is not the case anymore. For Mew, it tried to be a sweeper and a defensive Pokemon, but couldn't manage to at the same time. Instead, now with the bland psychic typing, which was okay but not great, it really was not a very reliable Pokemon, and it was not a good sweeper. It was a good sweeper, but you would have to set up quite a lot, either setting up a Rock Polish and then a Nasty Plot, or a Rock Polish and a Sword Stance if you really wanted to get a good sweep on. Also, Pokemon that you would have expected to die to +2 attacks actually could have survived them, like I said previously, Tyranitar, EV'd correctly, could live an Aura Sphere from Mew. The most common Mew set was a Life Orb Nasty Plot set with Fire Blast, Giga Drain, Dark Pulse, or Psychic. Take your pick from those last 4 moves that I suggested. Sword Stance Mew was good but not great, only having coverage of Zen Headbutt, Drain Punch, and Sucker Punch. Not the best, but definitely not the worst. Especially defensive Mew was also used with Taunt, Will-O-Wisp, and its Psychic Stab. It could have also used Taunt, but there wasn't Stealth Rocks in this generation. You would have probably used a different Stealth Rocks user down in UU. The Baton Pass set was used, but not to as much of an extent as it was last generation, for more Pokemon over base 100 were starting to pop up with Taunt, and Mew just wasn't as useful as it was previously. Now it was a Baton Pass set at most with only Rock Polish. If it could get it off, and Baton Pass would have been doing well. However, in this chain Mew was still pretty reliable, being able to gain Pokemon speed. They would have been switching in to try and break walls. Mew's versatility was good, but this generation it was kind of rigid. For a defensive Mew, couldn't really run more than one coverage move. This meant that as soon as you found out what Mew's set was, you could easily send in a Pokemon to counter it. Things like Chandelure, Crocodile, Darmanitan, and Heracross shut down Mew. However, some of them did have to be careful of Sucker Punch. Chandelure especially, most of those Pokemon could come in on Mew very easily, especially most of those Pokemon that I named were Choice Scarf users, if not all of them, so they would have outsped Mew and they'd been able to knock it out. Mew's old nemesis Weavile was back again in OU and could deal some damage to Mew. Not also to mention Zoroark, which could disguise other Pokemon and could retain its dark typing, meaning it resists Mew's usual stab that it was carrying. Sableye could also shut down Baton Passing sets with Priority Taunt. and Slowking at best was a decent counter to Mew. However, it had to be afraid of +2 Giga Drains, and the only thing Slowking could realistically do was fish for Skull Burns or potentially Dragon Tail phase Mew out, because most of the time you would have initially taunted as Slowking. And finally, Copagrigus could have done some work with Dark Pulse or Shadow Ball being able to shut down Mew. However, it was slower, and if Mew was carrying some other weird utility moves such as Dark Pulse or Sucker Punch, it could have shut down Copagrigus pretty easily. Mew's usual set in Aurus was to be a defensive stealth rocking variant, and because of this and his bulk, it could actually be promoted now from UU to OU. Not as great as its Uber days, but definitely good in comparison. Mew also was locked into usually the Will-O-Wisping soft rolling knockoff taunt set, which you're going to see here, and mostly was a special defensive pivot. However, defensive pivot with Cobra Berry was also pretty good as well. Mew also was a very reliable defogger, and one of the top tier defoggers in Generation 6 because of its low weaknesses of typing just because of Psychic. It was only weak to Ghost and Bug and Dark types. Fighting types were also ever common in the OU metagame, with things like Terrakion, Keldeo in OU and causing a muck there, so Mew could have easily resisted their stabs and came in. This time, the counters to Mew were kinda weird, being fire type Pokemon such as Heatran, Charizard X and Y, and Talonflame, and being able to resist Mew's primary way of statusing Pokemon in Will-O-Wisp. They had a fear Toxic, but things like Heatran were very safe switching. You could have ran something random like Earth Power or Earthquake, but generally Heatran would have been a very good switch to Mew. Mew is also set up fodder to a lot of Pokemon and usually only carried knockoff or Psychic, so it was easily pursuit trapped. And if Pokemon carried a Lumberry, then that means they cannot be burnt and could have got a knockoff on Mew. Once Mew lost his leftovers, it would have to suffer a lot more than it would have liked to, and that meant that Pokemon could have potentially set up on it like Charizard X.